Welcome to today's public forum on global unravel, great power conflict, middle powers, small state dilemmas, perspectives from Southeast Asia and New Zealand. First, I would say that it's very unusual. I think it might be the first time that we have only Thammasat professors speaking at July, all three of them. It's not by design, it's just by coincidence. And so welcome, thank you very much from Thammasat coming across town. And I want to also invite, welcome Ambassador John McKinnon all the way from New Zealand. Last night he arrived. So welcome. Yeah. Let me lay the groundwork, lay the scene, set the scene this way. We're talking about the international system breaking down. I think that's not a secret. I think that's not disputed anymore. You look at what's happening in the US, the Trump tariffs, and the US basically is violating, the Trump tariffs violate the most basic principle of international trade, and that is the most favored nations. These are unilateral tariffs imposed on everyone, including partners and allies, and there's a minimum of 10%. But that's just a symptom of a broader unraveling of the global system. And it's ironic that the US is leading this campaign, this effort to unravel, rethink, unwind, really breaking apart, loosening the international system that it constructed, principally constructed after the Second World War. And as a result, we have a lot of disruptions, a lot of dilemmas, a lot of turbulence, tension, very uneasy world we live in. Borders are up again, globalization is down, there'll be trade frictions. There'll be a slowdown in global GDP. At the same time, countries are being forced to spend more on defense, so there will be a squeeze. So it will be tough times ahead for everyone. For the middle powers and smaller powers in our neighborhood, for Thailand, Southeast Asian countries, from New Zealand, we will have to respond and I think navigate. For middle powers, and we will rely on Ajahn Gitti, who just came back from a year-long visiting professorship in Japan. They have more options, but also facing constraints. So why is this happening? I'll put it this way. At the end, about 35 years ago, at the end of the Cold War, there's a big debate in the US, I was there, about what's next. They won the Cold War. They won the Second World War. They won the Cold War. And there was a big debate about 1989, 1990, 1991. And one small faction, one minority faction said, it's enough. No more policing the world. Time to come home and fix the schools and the roads and hospitals. And these were the minority camp in the Republican Party, led by Patrick Buchanan, who ran for president. The presidential nomination of the Republican Party in 1988, 1992. They lost the debate. But that faction, that minority wing, it's taken 30, 35 years basically to take over the Republican Party and to win over the White House. If you go back to the April 2nd, some students here, April 2nd, Liberation Day speech by Donald Trump, and you go back to the transcript, he said it. He said that he's been thinking about doing this for 40 years, since the 1980s. And if you internet, Google search, Howard Lutnick, say Howard Lutnick, 35 years. Lutnick mentioned a number of times that Donald Trump has been thinking about doing this for 35 years. You're 35, Trump said 40. So 35 years, 40 years goes back to about the end of the Cold War period when they had this big contest in the Republican Party. And that faction lost, but over time they've won. And over that time, we had globalization and the hollowing out of the US manufacturing, investments in China, Southeast Asia, other countries and so on, and trade investment prosperity, APEC for example. But in the US, they were upset, they were resentful. They felt that they suffered. So now this US, the Trump administration, Trump 2, is the embodiment, the culmination of this movement, Trump movement, the movement behind Trump, not just Trump the man, but Trump the movement. Nativism, keeping immigrants out. economic nationalism, imposing tariffs on everyone, and really kind of a payback. They want countries to pay them back for propping up this international system over the last 5-6 decades. So that's why we have kind of a general broad breakdown of the international system, and it will likely get worse. But today we will look at different perspectives from Southeast Asia, from Japan, and from far away New Zealand about what's happening, about what to do, how to navigate. So let me begin with Ambassador John McKinnon. Ambassador John McKinnon has been New Zealand ambassador to China twice, not once, but twice. That would be unusual, right? It would be unusual for a lot of countries. So it's something you must have did a good job in your first stint, so that they send you again for the second time. And then I think, you have all the bios, but I'm not gonna read everything, but basically he's one of the most distinguished, decorated, recognized senior diplomats, retired now, but still involved in track 2, think tank dialogues, activities. So maybe I invite you first, Ambassador McKinnon, to share with us for 10 to 12 minutes. The New Zealand, I think New Zealand probably suffer more than a lot of other small states because they're so far away. And they're so reliant on the trade-led, trade-based international system. And when tariffs go up, they suffer a lot, and being so far away compounds that. So do you think that is the case, or New Zealand is just fine, doing fine?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Titnan, for that introduction and for your opening comments. As is probably very evident, I'm not a professor from Thammasat University, despite being very honoured to be here with 3 colleagues from there, as well as being at this establishment itself. And I must also convey apologies from my colleague, Suze Jessup, the Chief Executive of the Asian New Zealand Foundation, who was meant to be here, but owing to a series of weather events in New Zealand, and only in New Zealand, some of us were able to arrive here last night. She, I think, is arriving almost as we speak, and so unfortunately was not able to join us today, but she has been able to share some thoughts with me. So I will want to talk a little bit about New Zealand's view of what's been happening in the world, and then secondly about some specific responses that we have engaged in. And of course, I need to stress, although I have had this career in the public service, I'm no longer a public servant. I do not speak for the government or for anybody else other than myself. So if for whatever reason you don't like what I say, well, that's absolutely fine. I won't take that as a reflection on your views of what the New Zealand government is or is not doing. So let me start first of all by talking about the changes which have been taking place in the world, and Professor Titnan gave us a sort of a snapshot of all that's been occurring. And it is rather disconcerting and very challenging, and particularly for somebody like me, who has had a rather long career in the public service going back to probably before most of the people in this room were born. It is something which is a little difficult to get your head around. I've probably heard the phrase, the rules-based international order, more in the last 5 years than I've ever heard in the previous 45 years. And I think what's that telling me is not that that's a new concept or a new system, but rather that it's a system which is threatened and which nobody can any longer take for granted. In other words, it's something that we assumed was the case and we operated within those parameters, but now suddenly we're realizing that actually maybe it's not so much the case. Maybe things aren't what we thought, and that of course affects how we operate and how we behave in the world. We have always known that behind the rules and the systems that we have in place, the processes to discipline what goes on internationally, there is an element of power. The international order does not exist autonomously, exists as a function of the fact that states want it to happen, and they in effect are prepared to discipline their power in order that that be the case. That's what now is less certain, and we are less confident that that is the case. And for a country like ours, I think that means quite a big, significant change in the way we go about our international relations. It's not a very comfortable place to be in, especially for countries like ours, and dare I say it, even for some other countries in this region, who do not dispose of much power in the conventional or even the unconventional sense. In other words, a country like New Zealand relies very heavily on the processes and the systems which allow us to flourish in a world in which we actually do not have much economic or military power to dispose of. And so from that point of view, this change is not something which is just interesting to observe. It has a very, very real world effect on how we undertake our international relations and our diplomacy. There have been a variety of ways that people have described what's going on. One I just saw recently described it as the international order is like an orchestra in which the conductor has left the stage. And I think that's actually quite a good description, because if you imagine an orchestra with no conductor, you can imagine the chaos which will ensue when the violinists want to outdo the trumpeters and the trumpeters want to outdo the percussion, and there's no person in the middle who actually decides what should happen. And while I think that may not be the perfect metaphor, in some ways it does really characterize what we're dealing with, a world in which it's not absolutely confident who is in charge and who is doing what. And that brings me to the second point, which is unpredictability. And I think this is a real, real problem for a country like ours, but also for many businesses and many institutions, organizations, which have assumed a certain way of things will happen. And one thing we have learned, I think, in the past 6 months is that unpredictability is probably a safer guide to what is going on than predictability, which of course is a contradiction, because if it's unpredictable, how can you ever know what's going to happen? But I think, to be honest, many of us in this room will know that you wake up each morning and you hear the news and discover that things are not what you thought they were 24 hours ago or 48 hours ago. That is very, very difficult for many businesses and for many governments. They just aren't absolutely sure what the new day is going to bring. But this has actually, of course, also produced some extraordinary, in my view, quite extraordinary changes in the way that countries themselves have reacted or operated, and that's also something we have to take into account. So to give you just two examples, the Republic of Korea and Japan, and I think we'll be hearing a bit more about Japan a bit later, have in effect set aside their decades of mutual suspicion, if not hostility, and in fact are cooperating together in a way which is, I think, quite remarkable in terms of their 20th century history. And then to give you another example, Finland and Sweden, who we've always seen as sort of bastions of neutralism and whatever, have both decided to join NATO. Now, I don't need to spell out the reasons why Japan and Korea have got together and why those two countries have joined NATO. I think you all know that. But it's an indicator of the scale of the change which is taking place, that what we regard as fixed elements of the international order suddenly are no longer fixed. But it does mean that for countries, as I say, like New Zealand, there are definitely some risks involved in this. We don't really have, as I said earlier, the military or the economic heft to persuade people to actually deal with us as we think we should be dealt with. One might say that New Zealand's existential fear, and my colleagues here may disagree with me, is actually being forgotten. Well, I don't think we're at any risk of being forgotten now, but we may decide that being forgotten would actually be quite a good place to be in. But anyway, I don't think any longer an option for us. Keeping great powers and other powers sort of associated with us, but not in fact bearing down on us, I think is something that's very difficult. Secondly, of course, we can't outspend, one might say, other countries in terms of the delivery of assistance, the delivery of benefits to countries which we might wish to have a positive influence on. New Zealand has difficulty often balancing its budget anyway, and certainly we don't have a lot of extra to spend on places outside our area, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And the final issue, I suppose, is simply the asymmetry. this is now exaggerated. There's always been an asymmetry in our relations with other countries, but it's exaggerated if power is regarded as more significant than rules, and if in fact that power is used to exercise influence on us. So what are we doing about this, apart from me pontificating to you about what we should be doing and not doing? And of course, there are a number of strands in that process, and I will run through some of them for you. But I think it's important to say that in many ways, in this world that we now live in, we are more than ever takers of security and prosperity rather than providers of it. We're in a world in which actually it's quite hard to see our way forward, and I suspect that world is going to be one that we're going to be living in for the next few decades, which from a personal point of view means I'm very happy to have exited the New Zealand Public Service 4 or 5 years ago when things still look pretty normal. So I think first one is to simply say that we have to recognise that power rather than rules is now an organising principle of international relations. And that's actually been articulated in that way in some recent documents which have been put out by agencies of the New Zealand government. And this is not to say that we necessarily think that's good or we like it, but it's a recognition of a reality that we have to accommodate ourselves to, and we have to find ways of dealing with. So while we obviously do rely a lot on the international rules-based order, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll come back to that, we now also recognise that it's not the only game in town. It's probably much less of a one than it used to be. Secondly, we have this approach that some people have called threading the needle or walking the tightrope, which is trying to manage relations with big countries such as China on one hand or the United States on the other, without doing damage to our interests or to our relationships with them. And this is not easy, of course, because particularly, say, with China, but also with the United States, there are occasions when things happen and are done which actually are quite difficult for us to cope with. So if I can give 2 examples from either side to be fair and equitable, Chinese naval exercises on the Tasman Sea. Probably most of you don't know where the Tasman Sea is, but it actually divides Australia and New Zealand. And these naval exercises, which we had a little bit of notice, had quite an effect on commercial flights across the Tasman, which of course is a big activity for us. And that was something which we had not wanted. I mean, in terms of international law, it was probably strictly speaking okay, but that was about the limit of it. It certainly wasn't welcome, and it certainly created a certain mayhem about it. Secondly, of course, the recent decision on tariffs in the US, that mentioned the Liberation Day. I think it's a very strange name for a day which seemed to be other than liberation, but I guess it all depends where you're coming from. We're now under the gun of 15% tariffs. But the point I want to make is that this 15%, which is a bit higher, of course, than some other countries, took place almost at the same time as the director of the FBI was in Wellington opening a new FBI office there. Now, there have been connections between New Zealand and the FBI for many, many decades, so that in itself was not novel. But what it suggested is that within the system in Washington, there was no weighing up of the value that New Zealand might offer in this area against the fact that it was seen as damaging United States interests in another. In other words, what we have relied on in the past, which is saying, well, yeah, you may think we're a bit funny, but, you know, we're still an important country in this part of the world and so on and so forth, those equations don't seem to be making much sense anymore in Washington. Yet both those relationships, the relationship with China, the relationship with the United States, are vital for us. They're vital economically, they're vital strategically, they're vital because both those countries have an outsized influence in terms of the region and the world. We can't not deal with them. We may not especially like the particular people who are running the countries at the moment, but one of the burdens of being a country such as ours, you have to deal with who is there rather than who you might want to be there. And so that's quite an important constraint. At the same time, we also recognise that our interests are not identical to those of other countries. So we can't, tempting though it might be, we can't have our China policy made in Washington, nor can we have our US policy made in Beijing. We have to figure these things out for ourselves, and that's not always a straightforward exercise. Next point is that our Titane referred to the fact that New Zealand is a long way away, and it is a long way away. I know this because it took me 14 hours to get here yesterday, 3 different flights, and some running around airports to try to make connections. But anyway, here I am, so obviously it was okay. But regrettably, for us, geographic distance no longer confers some sort of immunity or isolation from trends in the world. That's partly because, of course, things like the internet and the cyber world, which impinge on us regardless of physical space. But also we have an extremely large EEZ, an exclusive economic zone, which is actually about the 4th largest in the world, which we have to look after. So there are, although in some ways, and I think it's probably still true that many New Zealanders think of New Zealand as being distant, actually we're not as distant as we maybe like to think we are. And in some ways we have to really be conscious that that distance and that isolation that we've enjoyed in the past maybe no longer gives us the protection that we used to have. So even areas of the world which in the past, and maybe even now, we sort of regarded as, quote, ours, unquote, such as the South Pacific or Antarctica, are now the object of contestation or of interest from other countries in a way which we probably were not used to before. Now, a few weeks ago, I was on the island of Niue, which I suspect 99% of the people on this room have never heard of. It's just east of Tonga, and it's associated with New Zealand. It's been self-governing for about 50 years. And I was there actually on holiday, you'll be pleased to know, but I couldn't help noticing there were excellent roads, which was quite significant because there's basically no public transport on this island, which is about 1,500 people, and you have to hire a car in order to get around, and the roads were quite good. The roads were largely built, the modern roads, by China. And in case you didn't realize this, there were lots of signs up telling you so. And this is not because, it was actually, to be honest, I was the beneficiary of this because it made driving around the island a lot easier than it would have been otherwise. But it's also a reminder that this is an island nation which is actually extremely closely associated with New Zealand, but we can't say to that, you shouldn't do X, Y, Z because, we don't like it. The fact is, from the point of view of the people or the government of Niue, this is almost like a free gift. This is something which, they've had offered to them and they've been happy to take it. So those are changes in the way in which our world that we live in have altered, which as things that are probably going to keep going on for quite some time. But even despite all that, we still, I think, and this is probably very important for a group such as this, we still have to stick with those rules that we can manage to sustain as much as possible. And to me, the example of this is probably the way in which the TPP was transformed into the CPTPP when the United States decided it wasn't going to go along with it, but the other countries, led I think largely by Japan, decided that it was still something that was worthwhile. And it may be that sort of approach, not that specific one, because there are some very specific aspects of it, that's the sort of approach we have to be thinking about. And what it leads into is a sense that we have to be willing to engage with countries in a variety of groupings, in a variety of ways, to achieve a variety of ends. There's no one single formula which is going to work. Finally, I can see I'm being looked at by the person on my right. We have sought to increase our defence spending. Now, this may sound a matter of no moment, but actually in New Zealand, spending on defence is not exceptionally popular, I would say. In fact, if your politician wants a short career, they can probably argue the case that they should spend more on defence. It's very, very different from Australia. But recently, I think people have begun to realise that we probably do need to spend a bit more, and we have, and we've committed to that, and that's something I think, again, which is a real measure of what's been happening. So I will pause at this point, but I just want to leave you with one thought, which is that 2025, this year we're in now, is not the same as 1925, let alone 1825. The world, even though we're looking as if we're operating in a different sort of space, is not the world that it was 100 or 200 years ago. There are many, many more countries, and we still have agency, but we have to learn how to use it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to follow up before I proceed to Ajahn Shanintira. Ambassador McKinnon, you mentioned China. Also, just very quickly, your perspective or view on early responses from New Zealand, to what's happening. 15% tariff. What's the perception? How do you feel about that? You mentioned China a little bit in your neighborhood, in New Zealand's neighborhood. What are the perceptions of China? Just very quick, 1 or 2 minutes.
Well, I'll try and be quick on what is actually quite a large topic. I mean, I think the issue with the tariffs, there's two issues. One is the absolute effect, which is very, very damaging for countries which have been used to be, for businesses which have been used to be operating with either zero or very low tariffs. And secondly, the relativity. So, for instance, I think Singapore and Australia both have kept 10% tariffs. So clearly there's a risk of diversion, because you might end up with businesses in the US deciding to source from elsewhere rather than from New Zealand. So that, I think, is a real issue. But as I said, the efforts to try to persuade the United States, well, maybe this is a bit gratuitous and that breaches a whole lot of WTO principles. We don't seem to be getting very far, but I don't imagine we're going to stop arguing the case for as long as possible. I think in terms of China, I would say that people are now more inclined to see some of the things that China does both domestically and internationally as problematic in terms of New Zealand, and that's been reflected in some of the polling that's been done, which says that we said the people in New Zealand see China as a threat or as whatever, as much as a friend. So I think there is some roll-on effect there, but at the same time, China is it is our largest single economic and commercial partner. So it's something in which New Zealand has a big stake. And that's why I say the equities for New Zealand in relations with China and the United States are both very significant, and we need to maintain them somehow.
Thank you. It's a big issue for us, the Trump tariffs in our region. I think that the US is going to alienate friends and allies by imposing these unilateral tariffs. 15% New Zealand, I think, there seems to be the rates seem to be 10%, 15%, 20% roughly. But in the medium, longer term, I just wonder if the US is doing itself a disservice, that this could be counterproductive, and it could well play into China's hand. Let me proceed to Ajahn now to my friends and colleagues and professors from Thammasat University. Not really a rival, we are cousins, but it's very. I just realized it's kind of unusual to have 3 Thammasat professors here, but really welcome. Now we will look at a little bit closer to home, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and for us in Southeast Asia, the tariffs are 19%. Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, 19%. Vietnam, 20%. But 20%, 19%, very incremental, roughly the same. It helps that the tariffs are in the same range, because otherwise it would make Southeast Asian economies very competitive with each other. But still, it could still lead to a diversion. If Mexico gets a lower rate, or some other countries' competitors get a lower rate elsewhere. But this is something that we're thinking a lot about, we might suffer from. Southeast Asia are doing different things now, I think, to navigate more membership in the BRICS. Indonesia joined as a member. Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam joined as partners of BRICS Plus. I think now at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meetings in Beijing, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Malaysia are there. And these are very kind of supportive of China. And so China is exerting, I think, influence, certainly, undeniably, in Southeast Asia. Ajahn Shanintira, so how do we, as smaller countries, rules-based, the international system is decreasingly rules-based. it's more might makes right. But for smaller countries around here, what do we do?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, first of all, and thank you for the question. Just a very short answer to your question. There's no single formula. I think we're all different, even though we're in the smaller state category. And I know it's debated out there, Thailand's a middle power, so on and so forth, and all that. But let me just use the word smaller in the sense that we're smaller than major powers. So it's a relative term. Now, this big category, smaller states covering 11 countries in Southeast Asia. There's a variation in capability, agency, GDP, so on and so forth. So there is no single answer, how we respond to these contemporary challenges. Another thing is geographical location is also going to affect not just trade and all that, but also security matters as well. For example, the South China Seas is a major conflict in Southeast Asia. A lot of us are reliant on US-led security arrangements. And I think the country that's in the most difficult position would be the Philippines because it's so dependent on the MDT, so on and so forth. Last year we saw tensions, a skirmish, I would say, in the South China Seas, more specifically the Sierra Madre, when the Philippine Navy tried to resupply the Sierra Madre, and that resulted in a clash with one Philippine officer losing his finger. So because the Philippines is highly dependent on the US for security, that would be a challenge because things are so uncertain. There's unpredictability in what's going on. It's not just the trade war. In that regard, while we're talking about security, because this, again, the US-led security arrangements is a key tenet of the liberal international order, I would say Vietnam has probably a better approach in that regard, where it's diversified its relationships, security relations and all that, with its four no's as well. Thailand, again, geographical distance. We are not a claimant to the South China Seas. We're further away from that. So we're not put in that difficult spot in terms of security. However, so I think there's a variation in terms of security on the impact of the United States disregard, disruption towards the liberal international order. I think you can see more commonalities in the realm of the economy. Again, with the trade war, as you mentioned, we've been slapped with 15 to, Southeast Asia would be 19-20%. There isn't much variation. And how we respond, I think the key is to salvage or keep maintaining these existing frameworks. Multilateralism isn't dead yet. So we've got ASEAN, we've got RCEP. RCEP is roughly the third of global trade. So if we can uphold these trading commitments, that would take the edge off, the pressure from the trade war. Again, as you mentioned, China has been quick to fill in this leadership gap in Southeast Asia. I don't think it's a new thing. It's actually been happening, I would say, going back to the Asian financial crisis. A lot of countries in Southeast Asia were quite disappointed with how the US, at least from the Thai perspective, we thought we were an ally during the Cold War. We should be given more support, more help during our time of need. Actually, it was China that stepped in. So China has been filling that leadership gap for quite some time, but it's just that this temporary period, what's happening now, has given China more of that chance. But at the same time, I think it's quite important that we realize that danger of kind of like tilting more towards China because of what's happening. Again, it's not all about China and the US. I mean, there are other partnerships that we can reach out to, middle powers, Japan, so on and so forth. I think key is like diversifying and adapting and all that. So I talked about security, the economics. Now, in terms of democracy and human rights, the Trump administration supports democracy and human rights selectively. And actually, you know, one would think, okay, that would give us a breathing space in Southeast Asia since we're semi-democracies to varying degrees and all that. But actually, that hasn't really necessarily been the case. And okay, so for Trump 1.0, I think after we had the coup in Thailand in 2014, we tilted towards China, were reprimanded by the West, EU, the US, and all that. So this is why we tilted towards China even more. But when Trump took to power, we managed to kind of like correct that tilt a bit, even before the return to electoral politics. So in that regard, it did work in our favor. But actually, it's not necessarily so, because you see, during Trump 2.0, we returned 40 Uyghurs, and then we were reprimanded for that. So I wouldn't say that even though Trump supports democracy and human rights selectively, that would give us Southeast Asian semi-democracies, breathing space. So I think there's a variation on how this Trump administration is impacting key tenets of the liberal international order in terms of Southeast Asia, in terms of like economics, security, and democracy and human rights. Let me say this and remind us that yes, the liberal international order is very fractured at the moment. It's more fractured than before. But however, challenges to the liberal international order have been happening since its inception in 1945. So, and it's, yes, we're talking about the US as a key architect attacking, disregarding key tenets of the liberal international order. But actually, they have been doing that since the Cold War. And just to throw in a few examples, the bombing in Cambodia during Lon Nol period, indirect support for the Khmer Rouge, allowing the invasion of East Timor to happen, and also providing Thailand with military aid despite our frequent coups during the 1970s. So they have been selectively supporting the liberal international order. But I think the key difference today is that it's happening on multiple fronts, and it's more blatant than before. And also, it's not just the US, but it's other world leaders that have capitalized on grievances, brought about problems such as economic liberalism, migration, so on and so forth. So it's not just the US, a lot of countries have been attacking the liberal international order. Now, even though greater states have, or large powers, have been selectively supporting the liberal international order, so have we. Southeast Asia is a region of semi-democracies. We have never been ideologically driven by Western liberal democracy. We've always had this fraught relationship with democracy, human rights, and all that, but we've managed. we've kind of like disregarded that part, but we've also benefited from a lot of parts. For example, economic liberalism, US-led security arrangements. So in that regard, actually, Thailand's position towards liberal international order has been consistent from the start, since 1945 until today. Now, because we do benefit from key tenets of the liberal international order, I'm just going to reiterate one of your points, that I think it's crucial for smaller states to stand with the international liberal international order, or what's left of it, at least the rules-based order, because this order benefits us the most. It respects the equality of states, protects sovereignty, and it has given us a voice in multilateral forums. We have never had this privilege in previous orders. For example, the pre-colonial Concert of Europe, even the China-led Mandela system, there wasn't that respect for, there was always external intervention. So this is our best chance for survival. So this is why smaller states should salvage, stand with whatever's left of the liberal international order.
Thank you, Ajahn. Let me follow up a little bit before I go to Ajahn Kiti. If you say liberal international order, rules-based liberal international order, this would be disputed and objected by many countries in the global south, especially South Asia. They don't like the liberal part of it because it's an international system, but they think that the liberal part of the liberal international order is actually an imposition of Western interests. That aside, let me follow up with this kind of question. Southeast Asia now is so divided. I think that we have an existential crisis now. Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and they're different. Southeast Asia is a region, ASEAN is an organization. They have now two major hotspots. Myanmar civil war. This is a subnational conflict that ASEAN has been unable to resolve, to mitigate, manage. They had some kind of a attempt to come up with a dialogue, to promote dialogue, known as a 5-point consensus of ASEAN. It hasn't gone anywhere. And now Thailand, Cambodia has a border conflict, and really a kind of a shooting war last month in late July. And the ceasefire that has been agreed is very fragile and delicate still. So this is a intra-ASEAN conflict. So ASEAN, you look at ASEAN now, you have the Philippines signing up to China on the one side. You have Laos as a kind of a Chinese client state on the other side. We're actually going to Laos for a conference this week. And in between, you have different countries trying to think about what to do next. And you have a very divided region. I think there's never been more divided since it was conceived 58 years ago, ASEAN. And it's because the major powers, in this case, US, China, they are not at peace and in balance. And when you have the major powers in conflict, you have a divided Southeast Asia. We saw this before between the US and Soviet Union. Now it's US, China. So for small countries, the future is not bright. The future is not good. You mentioned also about the autocracy, democracy. I mean, you could say that this region is a semi-democratic, but you can also say the opposite way is this region is more semi-autocratic. Two sides of a coin. But what do you think about, let's say, Thailand or Malaysia, Indonesia, a divided region? How do we close the divide or mitigate so that it becomes more united, so that ASEAN can work better again? Or are we in a terminal decline and ASEAN is more or less finished? It's not going to disappear, but it will not be effective moving forward. What do you think, Ajahn? What can we do to salvage ASEAN centrality and regroup and regain traction for ASEAN?
How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
That's a huge task. Let me just say this. Yeah, I totally agree with you. We're going through very trying times, and ASEAN is very divided. I don't have the answer, but what I can say is this. During the Cold War, national interests have come before regional interests. I don't think that has changed. But I think during the Cold War, what we have managed to do is integrate the national interests with the regional interests. But what we're seeing here today is you've got this struggle for elite security or personal survival among politicians in many countries, not just Thailand, you've got Cambodia and all that. But what's happening and breaking up is that not only national interests, but also those personal level interests. And so the main question is, how can these people who are in power and government, how can they converge these personal, national, regional interests? And I think that's the main key that's breaking us apart.
Thank you very much. Let me move to Jankiti's longtime friend, also a professor of international relations at Thammasat University at Jankiti Professor. Just like Ajahn Chanitira Nathalang, they come from the same department. Jankiti has been around, seen a lot. He just came back from a year as a visiting professor in Japan. And he's known as a kind of the Japan expert among the Thai scholars in Thailand. So John, as Japan, a middle power. And we actually have been looking for Japan to provide a third way, not US, not China, but middle powers led, maybe Japan, India, Japan, South Korea, Australia. But we haven't seen that. And Japan has domestic issues, problems, very weak at home, very fractious. But it's still, how is Japan adjusting to this kind of unraveling of the rules-based international system?
Thank you, Jay. It's great to be here back at Jula, which allowed me to come to this part of the city as well. Okay, I think today I have 4 points to share with you. I think I would put the title of my thesis today as Less US, More Japan. Less US commitment, more Japan engagement. First, I would like to trace back the historical development of Japan's roles in this region in the past 4 or 5 decades. 4 cases that show that Japan tend to exercise more role when the US disengaged the region or gave less commitment to the region. The first case is after the Vietnam War. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War in the early 1970s, Japan came to fill the gap, the vacuum of the US withdrawal by giving more ODA, official development assistance to the regions. Particularly a country like Thailand in 1982, 1983, Thailand topped the country that received ODA from Japan, which laid down the infrastructural development in Thailand pretty much. But I have to emphasize that during 1970, there was no prospect for Japanese investment at the time, or prospect for expanding market, because countries in the region still embroiled in the domestic insurgency and also war in neighboring countries, Thailand in particular. That ODA created important infrastructure, which became the good basis for foreign direct investment from Japan since the late 1980s, because the yen has been appreciated with the pressure from the United States that suffer trade deficit with Japan. Okay, that's the first case that Japan came to exercise a lot of roles in ASEAN. The second case is after the Cold War. I think most of you know about ASEAN Regional Forum, the ARF, inaugurated in Bangkok, 1994. That was also supported by Japan. Nakayama proposal at the time, the foreign minister of Japan, Mr. Nakayama, he drafted the Nakayama proposals to advocate the idea of multilateralism, multilateral dialogue in the region. And at the time, Japan was the second largest economy, so it's quite influential maybe not much in security, but economically and overall in Southeast Asia, very influential. And also Japan also dispatched peacekeeping operation to Cambodia in the early 1990s as well. So you can imagine that the US would not like to send any peacekeeping operation to Indochina after the failure in the Vietnam War. The third case after the financial crisis in the late 1990s, the Asian financial crisis. The role of Japan is quite large at that time with the Miyazawa Initiative, the so-called Miyazawa Initiative. Maybe most of you are not familiar with this term, but it's a soft loan scheme that helped boost the economy, not only in Thailand, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Korea as well. And that Japan's role is quite positive and contributive to the recovery of economy in the regions. And China somehow also was admired by not devaluing the yuan currency. But I think credit must go to Japan more during that time. So China was praised for doing nothing, for not devaluing the yuan currency. But of course, China has been influential after that. The fourth case is in the decade of 2010s, more recent, in the TPP case after the US withdrew from the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement, in 2017 with the Trump 1.0, the first Trump administration. So Japan came up to take the leadership role in achieving the CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership with the remaining 11 countries. That has been achieved in less than about a year. So it's quite remarkable for Japan to exercise that role because CPTPP represented a high standards FTA, including environment, intellectual property rights, and so on. And now UK, United Kingdom, has been included in the CPTPP as well. So Japan has been like a gatekeeper or the key actor in the CPTPP, which can be broadened, which can be expanded under the liberal order, under threat liberal orders at this point. Okay, that shows that Japan is quite resilient and quite activist during the time when the US somehow gave less commitment or disengaged with the region. And now it's not only Southeast Asia, as shown in the CPTPP case. It's broader than just Southeast Asia. It connects the Pacific, in fact. So the second point is on security. The point that I made earlier is more on economics, not much on security. But what about on security? I think Japan, even though the US has remained engaged in the regions as the resident power, but Japan had made some difference in the region. First, on non-traditional security, NTS, non-traditional security. Japan has been active in this area, particularly after the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. This was the first time that Japan dispatched the largest SDF, self-defense force overseas for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief activity in the regions. And followed up by the anti-piracy initiatives that is set the information sharing center in Singapore. And Japan has been active on human security. In fact, it proposed the Human Security Trust Fund in the United Nations in the late 1990s. Secondly, on the FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, Japan also emphasized infrastructures here in the FOIP, not only security. Japan came up with the Quality Infrastructure Initiative quite earlier than the Biden B3W, Build Back Better World Initiative. In fact, Japan has been active on infrastructure development in the region of Southeast Asia a long time ago, since the 1960s. And Japan also initiated OSA, Official Security Assistance, in a few years ago. And that related to defense equipment transfer, like Coast Guard vessel, patrol vessel to countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, radar monitoring systems. And they also help countries like the Philippines on maritime law enforcement. And overall in Southeast Asia, in terms of capacity buildings, bilateral exercise, multilateral exercises, it seemed that countries in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, they seem to be more comfortable working with Japan in this area of maritime cooperation rather than working with the US sometimes. Japan came to be a little more neutral, although it's been quite stick to the US alliance, but somehow Southeast Asia are quite comfortable with working with Southeast Asia. I give you one more example. On the Cyber Security Cooperation Center, I cannot recall the full name, AJ, ASEAN, Japan, capacity building on cyber security, something like that. That was happening in 2017. I don't think we can think about having cyber security cooperation center with either the US or China, but Japan can do so. So in a sense, Japan can offer some kind of alternative for security needs in Southeast Asia in terms of law enforcement, maritime security domain awareness, MDA, for example. And I think Japan also advanced its cooperation with NATO. In the past few years, Japan has been a regular participant in the NATO summit. And also Japan, the UK and Italy have been developing the next generation stealth jet fighters together. And Japan also played an important role on that. It's interesting that Japan does not joint develop jet fighter with the US, but with Europe, with UK and Italy. So that means I think Japan is trying to find some alternative rather than the US alone. Of course, it needs to be stick to the US alliance, but somehow it came to be more active in other regions. And in Ukraine, they were quite active. President Kishida visited Kiev and also gave a lot of support to Ukraine. And also they are also receiving refugees from Ukraine as well in Japan. All right, and the third point, I think the way for Japan now, I would like to quote the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, which initiated a very interesting project which Jay and I also participated. Partnership of the Middles. In the world whereby US-China strategic rivalry have been intensifying, we should look for middle power to try to mediate or navigate the global challenges in many ways. So I think Japan would be a very important country among the major power apart from the European country, EU, United Kingdoms, ASEAN. ASEAN quite exhausted. I mean, probably Professor Chanintida did not mention much about ASEAN, specify the fact that how much can we hope on ASEAN. Anyway, but we need to somehow look for ASEAN as well as a middle power. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, India. I think that is the way that we should aim for the role of this kind of middle power. India is interesting because yesterday I think you follow the SCO summit. India seems to be now quite close to Russia and China, and they seem to be a camp. India, of course, is not clear for India, but somehow India can be a big actor in this partnership of the middles. And that can be done through, for liberal economic order, CPTPP, which can be expanded. Indonesia has shown interest and apply. Thailand used to be solicited by Japan to join the CPTPP, and Thailand also showed interest. And RCEP, in this region, we have Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership consisting of ASEAN plus 5 countries, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. And also Japan, China, and Korea have been deliberating the possibility of the trilateral FTA. I think it can be possible more than any time in this juncture of time. Probably it's more possible, but I don't think it's easy to be delivered. But somehow it's a chance for China, Japan, and Korea to discuss together. And on security, I think partnership of the middles, there are opportunity for these middle countries to make a difference during the time when US is turning more and more inward. But we have to wait for the US how Trump would turn out in the Indo-Pacific, because now he seems to be preoccupied with the Ukraine, the tariff, and so on, and Israel issues. But he said that he would like to probably meet with Kim Jong-un by the end of this year. That would be very interesting. Okay, my last point on, so far the 3 points I talk about opportunities for Japan, look back to the history, past achievement, and so on, but abundant of challenges at this point for Japan, at least 3. First, China activism on now. Yesterday they call Eurasia-centric global order. I mean, Putin was small, but it seemed to be another camp of powers around China, Russia, probably India, and Central Asia countries. Laos has been admitted to SCO as well. Cambodia probably in the futures, Iran, Pakistan. So a different kind of camp. I don't think this picture would be comfortable for European country or Japan when they see this kind of development. And it's quite on the 3rd tomorrow, right? Tomorrow there's gonna be a parade in China, whereby Russia also sent troops to participate. Right? So it's quite interesting developments, and at the 80th anniversary of the end of the World War II. And second challenge is on domestic problem in Japan. Japan faces abundant domestic problems. No strong leadership like Abe. Now Ishiba has been under attack. He lost 2 elections, upper house election recently, and earlier last year, the lower house elections. And the weak yens, domestic economy in terms of higher living costs, but low wages. I mean, not increasing wages. People are not happy with what's happening in Japan. Over tourism, so many Chinese people came to occupy real estates and also lands in Japan. So, and Japan, we have witnessed some Japanese first party, the Sunset Door. But still small. But we have to keep watching this kind of development in Japan as well. But I would say that the media in Thailand tend to be exaggerate what's happening in Japan in many ways. This kind of Japan First party is not that quite strong. But we have to keep a closer watch, because young people also support this party. All right, and also the last challenge is on the US, on the United States, how it would turn out in the Indo-Pacific. I think in NATO, it's very clear that US require NATO country to increase the defense budget, right, to 5% of GDP, but some country agreed 3.5, something like that. And I think the US would require Japan and even Korea to do more in the region, not only increase the budget. I guess that would be the case, and that would be somehow difficult for Japan, because Japan has been the peace the position itself is peace-loving country, loving countries with Article 9, not to engage much in international conflict and so on. Okay, anyhow, I think there are both opportunity and challenges for Japan to conduct more role as a middle power, trying to navigate the global challenges together with other middle power in Europe, in Asia, and in the Oceania, Australia, New Zealand. But it's not easy task. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn. Let me follow up a little bit before I move on to Ajahn Titipat. You know, what you said really makes me feel like we really miss Japan, right? I mean, the 1970s had the Fukuda Doctrine, and then you mentioned in the 80s it is so much for Southeast Asia, especially after 1985, the Pansai Accord invested in Southeast Asia, FDI, Japan, you know, and then all the way through Miyazawa after the crisis in 97, 98, and then the Greater Mekong sub-region, you know, building the roads, east-west, north-south corridors. You can drive from here to Da Nang, to Vietnam. So Japan did so much, and I just think that they must feel like their thunder has been eclipsed, if not stolen, by China. China is taken over. Right? Look at Laos now, it's all Chinese. And what Japan used to be in the region now has been supplanted by China in many ways. So we miss Japan. Japan gets a very favorable rating in all the surveys in the Southeast Asia. Every year, the number one most trustworthy, most favorable country is Japan. Southeast Asia likes Japan. But where is Japan? So you mentioned domestic issues, but also they don't have the geoeconomic prowess or the wherewithal that they used to have, being the second largest economy now. I think the number 5 or number 6, going to be number 6 to number 5 now. So some constraints. Yet this partnership of the middles is still gaining some traction. I think, you know, a lot of smaller countries don't want to be answerable to China, certainly, and certainly not U.S. But this third way is still elusive. So my quick question, Ajahn, would the U.S., you know, you mentioned the Japanese strategic autonomy in a bit, and maybe rebalancing with Europe, not just U.S. Would the U.S. or would China allow a viable partnership of the middles? You know, would the U.S. allow Japan to lead the third way, or would the U.S. stymie and prevent Japan? You know, the U.S. says if the BRICS country do anything, he's going to slap. Trump said 100% tariffs or 200% or whatever on BRICS, right? So if there's an alternative agency of the middles, would the U.S. even allow that? And, you know, would Japan be assertive enough to press ahead with that kind of agency? That is a good question. I think it's not easy for Japan to lead or to do much. However, I think we still, in some area, I guess Japan can, together with other middle power, can do more, like in the case of environment, economic orders. I think because the US tend to be isolated itself in a sense, so other countries, it's legitimate for other countries, for the remaining, to work together to maintain the liberal orders, environment as well. But on security can be tricky. However, I think Trump would try to impose more burden for Japan and even Korea in the regions. So by default, Japan may have to exercise more role in the regions, in the Trump preferences, but not in the way that they would gang up separate group or something like that. Even though they do so, I think US would be confident to control what the European country, UK, and also Japan. It can be some space that Japan can maneuver, middle power can maneuver to exercise more role in both economic and security areas. Thank you. Ajahn Titipat, maybe the next 10, 12 minutes. There's a lot of realignments and rebalancing. So, you know, India, China, now bromance again, and Russia, the Russia-Ukraine war in Europe. So you see these bigger, middle and bigger players and powers, that if you look at the footwork and the movements, they are really busy realigning, and for us, we can only watch them, but this is consequential. From your perspective, you worked a lot on middle powers, also great powers, and so on. What do you think what can we anticipate now? China is really taking advantage of, I think, of the situation of the global system where the US is pulling back in key areas.
Thank you, Ajahn Jay. Good morning, everyone. I think as a last speaker, it's always challenging to speak after the three distinguished speakers, colleagues, and friends. But I think I would like to do this way. I would like to zoom out a little bit and answer Ajahn Jay's questions by looking at a big picture of the global power politics right now. Okay, it might be a little bit more thoughts or theories about what's going on in the world, in particular in the global turbulence today. I think I have three main points. The first one, I would like to look at the trends or dynamics of global power politics. First, three trends. And then the second one, I'd like to look at the dilemmas that middle powers and smaller powers, or as Ajahn Nintala mentioned about smaller states that we encounter, would identify at least four meta dilemmas. And if time allows, the third part, I'd like to talk about another thing following Ajahn Gitti. I coined the terms or the approach called leading from the middle a couple of years ago. So I think that would be a kind of new practice international politics that we might need to shed light on that particular issue. First of all, we now know that we are living in a difficult and hard times of global politics. The world is in eras of global turbulence. It's a transformed world with power vacuum, with rule vacuum, contending with unprecedented and unpredictable challenges. I think we are overwhelmed with Trump factor. Okay, either person or movement, as Ajahn Jay mentioned. But I think we might need to think beyond Trump a little bit and provide a kind of big picture of the global structural transformation of global politics, which have been longer in the making. I think the structural transformation happens before Trump, and I think will last after Trump. It's undeniable that Trump has disrupted and accelerated this transformation. The tariff war is extremely important. Okay, I don't say that it's not important, but my argument is that Trump and this trade war, tariff war, is merely a tip of the iceberg. Underneath and undercurrent this, we should see the big picture of maybe what I call global geopolitical iceberg that might cover something beyond tariff war, that we might need to think about text war, AI war, resource war, critical mineral war, and actual wars in realities. Titanic in the past, I think we use this metaphor, Titanic hit the iceberg not because of the tip of the iceberg, but underneath, undercurrent that I think the world has been encountered. So I would identify at least three trends or seismic shift in the global politics right now. Number one, a shift in global rules of the game, okay, from the first G of globalization to the second G of geopolitics / geoeconomics right now. Second, a power shift. And the third is a shift in global governance, whether we call it a rule-based order or something bigger about multilateral global governance. Okay, so allow me to unpack these three shifts in order. I think the first one, we see the shift in global rules of the games from globalization to geopolitics. The era of globalization is replaced by the new eras of geopolitics. Okay, but I think these are kind of parallel systems that many countries, great or small, are navigating within. Some might play the globalized game, some might play in the geopolitical, geoeconomic game. But I think the geopoliticization of world politics revolves around power rivalry, zero-sum game, the bifurcation, or if you like, a clash of international orders, okay, between liberal rule-based order on the one hand and emerging orders, okay, whatever we call it, some of neo-Westphalian orders, I might say that illiberal orders, led by countries like China, Russia, maybe perhaps India. But I think this is first and foremost a geopolitics of hubris, with decoupling, de-risking, and distrust looming large nowadays. I think this is maybe a first aspect of this the shift in global rules of the game. The second aspect, I think we also see geopolitics with geoeconomic weaponization. Okay, so geopolitics and geoeconomics are not separable. Geopolitical discourse transforms many players to think and act upon economic in different ways. It is not an economic cooperation, but rather a geoeconomic tool of statecraft for the geopolitical ends. Some call it a weaponized interdependence, the ways in which highly complex interdependence and strategic resources become used as a weapon to bargain with others for geopolitical purposes. The third point, the third aspect of this shift in global rules of the game, I think we might need to think of the metaphor of geopolitical iceberg, which is, include a multi-layers and multi-dimensional perspectives of this iceberg. Let's imagine there's the iceberg here with a geopolitical on top, the tip of the iceberg, that over the water level, you might see the tariff war and some aspect tech war, but underneath, undercurrent, you see another aspects of competition, geopolitical and geoeconomic competition, ranging from tech war, AI war, trust war, even chip war, cloud war, and cyber war, and struggle for resources, and so on and so forth. Okay, that I think we need to unpack. The fourth point about this change in global rules of the game, I think we see that we are in the era that we haven't named yet. Okay, so some say that in the past it's post-Cold War world, but still we are not sure what we are now, geopolitical orders, or some call it a new Cold War era. Okay, but for me, I think it's not yet the new Cold War, at least not yet, and should not be so. Okay, it might be a cold peace. Okay, but it's very problematic in this world. Okay, because the new Cold War, I think, is neither a good metaphor nor a good solution to our disrupted world. I think a couple of key points might need to be highlighted. Like I think it might be a misleading and dangerous analogies. Okay, it's unable to see the whole forest. Okay, like the global iceberg. I think it's different from U.S.-Soviet Cold War. Okay, different by ideologies, but now I think it might be a clash of international orders, in particular the clash of nationalisms, US and the Chinese one and beyond. Okay, in particular the techno-nationalisms. Under Trump, the values and value system are downplayed to a certain extent. Many players, in particular middle and smaller powers, prefer hedging rather than taking side. I think some might take side in this intense geopolitical competition. That is the first shift. The second shift, I think, is a global power shift. The IR folks are still debating whether and how, in what ways global power is distributed and diffused. So the debate about polarity, okay, some might say it's a shift from unipolarity to multipolarity, and so on and so forth. But I think the global power shift today might be a multiplex world, not in the sense of Amitabh Bhattacharya that talk about the multiplexities, but I would like to say that my understanding is that the multiplex world is a multipolar plus complex world. Okay, some might have the term VUCA world and so on and so forth. But I think if we unpack this global power shift, we might see a kind of militarily at the top echelon of power is now maybe a kind of G2. I don't want to call it bipolarity, but a G2 at the top. Economically, it's multipolar world. Okay, where have uncertainties, so many economic crises and problems all around. Below, you have a social cultural power which is more diffuse and shaped by many crises like poly crisis, perma crisis. So power is more diffuse beyond the West right now, like a vertical diffusion, but also towards the disruption, disruptive technologies, perhaps the horizontal diffusion of power. Okay. The third point, I think we see a shift in global governance as another trend and dynamics nowadays. You see a kind of decline in multilateralisms, okay, which culminate in sidelining of foreign multilateral organization and to an increasing disregard for international law. We might probably see a la carte multilateralisms. rather than a kind of wholesale multilateralism that like in the globalized world. Multilateralism without US liberal leadership or hegemony under Trump, US has reduced its commitment to multilateral institutions and relies more on America First strategies. China is increased its influence in the United Nations, cultivate significant support in the global south, and build new institutions in line with its power and preferences. Okay, many might not like the term rule-based order, but I think multilateralism is still relevant despite so many challenges from within and without. I would like to argue that the resilience and relevance of multilateral institutionalization is now shaped by the global south, multilateral diplomacy, middle power, internationalisms, okay, which survive and thrive during the Trump 1.0, and I think in the future, I think I will second Ajahn Gitti points about partnership for of the middle, right, Ajahn? And regional multilateralism like European Union, and to a lesser extent maybe ASEAN and some other regional organizations. But we see a clash of international orders, like previously Salman Huntington might highlight about clash of civilization. I would say that now we encounter a clash of international orders amid geopolitical rivalry. I think there is an emergence of parallel and rival institutional orders, okay, liberal rule-based order, which is declining. Another one is emerging but not yet established, okay, which might cover in terms of BRI rules, BRICS rules, whatever we call it, okay. But I think the crisis of liberal international order is now largely about a crisis of leadership, more than, and maybe a kind of a democratic backsliding globally in state, okay. So against this backdrop, the future of global governance, I think, will depend on institutional adaptations to this new geopolitical landscape. First of all, there is a tendency towards alternative institutional frameworks. Second, we see a shift towards an informal global governance, which comprises a club of like-minded powers and players, most notably the G7, G20, BRICS plus. Third, the rise of minilateralisms included an informal, flexible, more informal, more flexible group of 3 to 5 powers also, okay, having mutual interests, sharing values, and so on and so forth. So I think in general, the formal global governance or global power politics has been bypassed by a clash of geopolitically oriented orders and their bifurcated institutional platforms. Okay, that is my first part. The second part, I think I'd like to think a little bit, maybe a kind of key takeaway. I will not go into detail, but I think broadly speaking, I think the world has been encountered with key strategic dilemmas for great powers and smaller powers alike. Okay, I identify at least 4 dilemmas or meta dilemmas that I think we need to think about. One, I think is a Thucydides trap from academic point of view, and now policy-wise, thinkers also use the term Thucydides trap. It's about power transition, right? Whether this such power transition will be peaceful or whether war is inevitable or not. I think that's the first one. The second, but lesser known, I think is also called Joseph Nye, the late Joseph Nye, called it the Kinderberger trap. I think it's about the leadership dilemma, okay, in a sense that, with following renowned economist Charles Kinderberger, Nye compare, the 1930s with kind of our current 21st century international orders, okay, whether we have a leadership crisis or not. I think it is. We are encountering with leadership crisis. The U.S. trying to not to provide these leaderships and responsible power. China, on the other hand, okay, stepping in some areas, but not all areas. In particular, those areas that related to liberal or democratic values. I think this lead to the third meta dilemma, which we might call, I call it a kind of a Gramscian trap. There's following Anthony Gramsci's, I think the world is interregnum when the old is fading away while the new is not yet established. I think that's a problem in our current situation. In particular, the narratives that the world has been encountered has been contested. Okay, so rule-based order is not that dominant anymore. Okay, if you look at the regional orders right here in Asia Pacific or now Indo-Pacific, I think we have three competing regional orders or narratives. Okay, at least I think I would say. The first one is FOIP, the five narratives led by the US and some Quad countries. The second one is BRI narrative, Belt and Road Initiative orders led by China and plus other countries. And the last one is in limbo or in declining, the ASEAN way, okay, or ASEAN center, ASEAN centrality, ASEAN-led institutional frameworks in the region. I think this is another, the third complexities of this dilemma. Last but not least, we have the dilemma for smaller states or the middle powers, which is the some might call it Lilliputian dilemmas, following Jonathan Swift's conspicuous characters in Gulliver's Travel. We have this the Lilliputian dilemma for small to medium powers in the world to manage and navigate the great power competition and maintain their own strategic autonomy. Okay, so I think this is a key dilemmas for the world right now. Okay, so my last part. Okay, I try to be brief as much as I can. I think what we might need to think among the small to medium-sized powers. Okay, whatever we call it. Okay, I think go back to Ajahn Jay's question to Professor Gitti. I think I think we should not, like smaller and medium powers, should not ask whether the great power would allow us to do anything, but instead we should take the initiatives to work together in terms of the joint, share interests, share values, and even kind of enhance agencies for the smaller and medium-sized countries. But it would be difficult, as Ajahn Gitti mentioned. I think it would be difficult. It would be vulnerability in case of the geopoliticization of the world, of course. Okay, but let me unpack a little bit about middle power. I think my understanding. Okay, I try to go beyond the traditional understanding about middle power, which tend to be a now, right? Which tend to be a now, like being a middle powers. Okay, they have the they claim the middle position in the global power or seek a status as a middle power, right? But my idea, I think, will be more a verb rather than a noun. Okay, middling or leading from the middle as the verb that might illustrate the social practice and action rather than the actor per se. Okay, so we look at the agencies, enhanced agency, what actor actually do or perform in practice, rather than who the middle power is. I think my take from international relations perspective would be a more dispositional characteristic. Okay, I have 8 points about the leading from the middle approach that I'd like to highlight, which I argue that the leading from the middle is a strategy that a middle power or a group of combined middle and perhaps smaller states adopt their leadership in the middle level of global pecking orders in order to uphold and protect their common interests and share values. It is a strategic vision and position that a middle power, a group of middle powers, pursue in order to hedge with great powers, buy them within a so-called maybe rule-based international order in the region, as well as initiate region-wide political, diplomatic innovation and advocacy. So in other words, by doing so, it might create a more amicable space for a multipolar, multiplex, or polycentric world order. I have 8 points quickly. Ajahn Jay, please allow me, but you can stop me anytime. Okay. Okay, 2 minutes. Okay. The first one I think is about leadership. Okay. Middle powers or leading from the middle needs proactive actors or agencies. Okay, to enhance the roles in the world. Number 2, leadership should be innovative and visionary. It takes a visionary initiative in specific issue areas. Okay, so leading from the middle exhibit a unique behavior and practice in niche areas within the international institution or regional institution like human security, human rights, gender, foreign policy, agricultural power, and so on and so forth. Number 3, okay, third point, leading from the middle, okay, is within the international pecking order. I think this is untapped potentiality. Okay, not previously, middle powers might be a kind of rule taker rather than a rule makers. But I think now, is as a leading from the middle, they might need to think about rule maker together with rule taker as well. Number two, a kind of differentiation and differentiation of the roles of the middle power in the world. Number four, middling as a practice differ from other diplomatic practices like muddling through, which Thailand has sometimes used muddling through to survive without strategic positionings and so on, or muddling or meddling. Okay, so we have a middling as a practice, a different form of practices. Number five, leading from the middle can be performed individually or collectively. Okay, so in other words, the leading from the middle approach can create a concert of middle powers. Okay, MIGTA, for example, a grouping of Mexico, Indonesia, Republic of Korea, Turkey, and Australia, perhaps might be the example. This approach is based on like-mindedness of mutual interests and shared values. A concert of middle powers can be built on interpersonal network and trust. Okay, it can emerge within the traditional platforms such as ASEAN community as a caucus, or new institutional forums such as a minilateral grouping. Okay, number six, I think leading from the middle approach can complement and strengthen strategic hedging rather than hedging by default or behavior in general. Seven, the leading from the middle will be more effective when it adopts so-called soft balancing, a non-military forms of balancing, like institutional balancing at the institutional level, or what I call myself discursive balancing, which is a balancing at the discourse or narrative level. My last point, amid the decline of global governance and multilateralism, the leading from the middle approach can promote and protect multilateralism and internationalism. So it might provide multilateral solutions, okay, to this global turbulence. Second, middling multilateralism serves the mutual interest of middle powers or a sub-concert of middle power. And three, it can have the systemic impact. Okay, I don't want to romanticize or idealize this concept, but I think to act collectively, I think middle power or middling as a practice is international in focus while being multilateral in methods and good international citizenship in conduct. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hachan. I think Thitipat, very rich and very complex, but also I really like your outline of the various levels of analysis and the questions about leadership. So let me open the floor by teasing out this point about leading. So great powers, presumably great powers want to lead. I mean, what's the point being great power not to lead? But then the question is, where do they lead from? So you lead from the front, great powers want to lead from the front, presumably. Middle powers can only lead really from the middle or from behind. Small countries, they don't, it's very hard for small states to lead. So it's interesting what the US is doing, and you mentioned the Kinderberger trap and the Thucydides trap. So they want to lead. But the leadership that they espousing, projecting under the current administration is a different kind of leadership. It's a more kind of a leadership by force, by tariffs, by protectionism. It's not an open kind of leadership. They might say liberal kind of leadership, and that would be kind of the Kinderberger trap. But it's more kind of the closed or the adversarial kind of leadership, pushing others down. And this is really disruptive for the system. China also wants to lead. And it's interesting how I don't have yet a grasp on the kind of the leadership the Chinese are trying to project. But, we also have middle powers trying to lead from the middle. On that note, we can continue this conversation. The floor is open for questions, comments from anyone. Ajahn Sri Laksana, Chenครับ
Thank you very much, Ajahn Thitinan. I'm also from Thammasat,
but from the Faculty of Economics. When we talk about Trump's tariffs, we often view it as a threat. And many countries have retaliated with their own tariffs, and as many mentioned, that we have tariff wars going on around the world now. But I'd like to take a rogue view in that, although it's not a blessing in disguise, but perhaps maybe there's a silver lining in Trump's tariffs, because when a tariff is imposed, it affects different groups of people in the country differently. What I would suggest for small countries like Thailand, small countries cannot affect their terms of trade, their international terms of trade, is that to reduce, not retaliate with higher tariffs, but to reduce their own tariffs. What would happen if you do that? If you reduce your own tariffs, who benefits in a small country like Thailand? The consumers benefit. The foreign goods coming in will come in at a low price. How low depends on the elasticities and so on. But some people gain, some people lose. The people who lose are the producers, the manufacturers who have to compete with the foreign goods. If we lower the tariffs, they have to compete. But the competition, we should not, continue protecting. I mean, if they cannot compete, it means that they are not as efficient. And so what leadership that Dr. Jay was talking about, we need leadership within the country. That is, if they cannot compete, then the leaders, what they need to do is to support the losers in the transition, for them to adapt into different areas of production or manufacturing for a short-term period. And for the leadership in the country is to balance those different interests. And so, when Thailand was faced with Trump's tariffs, the negotiations, I felt, was actually a blessing in disguise, that we should actually unilaterally reduce our tariffs for every country, not just for the US. Some people will benefit, some people will lose. We have to balance those interests to support the losers just for the short term, to upgrade, upskill, and improve the way we operate, the way we produce and manufacture.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ajahn. I think that, if it's an opportunity, it can be an opportunity, the Trump tariffs. If it goes well, if we can capitalize on it, it's a way of tackling monopolies, making the Thai economy more competitive, liberalizing. So very much on point. And to do that, you need a kind of the right mix of leadership and a policy mix, but also the ability to stand down and overcome the vested interests, the conglomerates, the tycoons, right? Very powerful in Thailand, but it's a great opportunity. It's one good way of seeing the Trump tariffs. Questions, comments? Please tell us a little bit who you are. And then...
Oh, okay. My name is Itipan. I'm from Thammasat University, Faculty of Political Science. You are all talking about the world right now is affected greatly because of Trump presidency, right? The Trump 2.0 and the idea of American isolationism. But in the US, there are two political parties now. They drastically different ideologies, different views, and the idea of what they want the US to become, right? So if in the next election, it happened that the Democratic Party candidate wins back the White House, what do you think that it will change in terms of this decline of multilateralism and the decline of liberal international order? That's all.
My name is Tapai So from Konkani University International College. I want to ask a question about Japanese engagement in ASEAN, Southeast Asia. So, Ajahn mentioned about Japan has been engaged since 1980s, 1990s. So at that time, if I'm not wrong, China was on the way its economic reform. So it means that Japanese engagement, economic engagement in Southeast Asia is earlier than China. So why right now we have seen that much influence of China and much more influence China in Southeast Asia than Japan. So why Japan, do you think that Japan failed to use such leverage by using such economic leverage in Southeast Asia and why? Yes, this is my question. I'm Kasariang. I'm from Thammasat University, currently Australian Embassy intern. So the many distinguished speakers mentioned the world is uncertainty, climate change, possible for war, crisis of hegemony, and poverty, inequality. But I want to ask, did you really see a hope, a good thing in a bad thing? Like one Chinese philosopher and can say, in the midst of chaos, there also opportunity. Did you really see hope in the world currently? Thank you.
My name is Sarangon Nawapipat from Master Degree Political Science, Chulalongkorn University. I have a question about New Zealand, as I know recently that New Zealand vision on the global politics now is the first, they might a little bit offense, but doesn't seem reliable on the alliance with United States. Second is seeing China as a political threat, and the third one is I think everyone knows that New Zealand has a lot of cooperation and diplomatic strategy with Australia. So do you see that between China and Australia, New Zealand, there's Southeast Asia? And many people see Southeast Asia as a contested area between great powers, between China and Western powers. So my question is, New Zealand and Australia have any vision to strengthen the roles and with alliance in Southeast Asia, or have a willing to participate or have influence in Southeast Asia more than before?
Okay, thank you. So New Zealand-Australia relationship, partnership, alliance, and then the New Zealand and Australia with Southeast Asia, ASEAN. Okay. In fact, the Asian-New Zealand Foundation is in the region this week to precisely talk about this relationship with Southeast Asia. So thank you. I'll take the last question or comment from Ambassador Kasit Pirom, our former foreign minister in 2008 to 2011. But ท่านทูตครับต้อง please have to be a short one.
Thank you. After the Second World War, the United Nations organization was being set up, and the most important body, inside the UN was the UN Security Council, the 5 permanent members. And there was sense of optimism and hope for the future of mankind. But immediately that optimism disappeared because the 5 permanent members became antagonistic with one another. And that antagonism within the 5 permanent members remains to this very day. So my question to all the Tan Ajahn panelists is, what would be the possibility of the 5 permanent members come back to diplomacy and dialogue and carried out the responsibility, collective responsibility for peace, prosperity of the global humanity? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's some good questions here. And let me come down the row from Ajahn to depart first. Just 2 minutes each. That's all the time we have for. I think, is Trump long term? How long term is Trump? Trump to Japan, Southeast Asia, how Japan gets supplanted by China, how did Japan allow that to happen? And then about New Zealand in particular. And I think there was a question, I mean, from Tantul Kasit, the permanent five, can they still get their act together? And there's also a broad question about even despite all the disruptions and turbulence and conflict, maybe things can still turn out okay. Can we still be hopeful? Ajahn Thitipat. Just a couple minutes, please.
Sure.
You don't have to answer everything, just whatever you like.
Thank you. I think that we take my students from Thammasat questions, Itipan. I think, first of all, I think it's not taking isolationist policy, but maybe unilateralist more than multilateralist or bilateralist stance. So it set the new game, the rule of the game, okay, like the tariff war and so on and so forth, okay. The second point, I think U.S. is still seeking hegemonic power in terms of preponderance of power militarily, economically, but not in a liberal leadership anymore. I think this is different. The history of the world might say that when the return of Biden administration, okay, you see the return of multilateral governance at some point, but with difficulty, with modification. I think it's a question about the long-term commitment and trust building among alliance and international partners. Okay, because I think trust and commitment need to take time to develop, right? So I think a couple of key points, even a kind of the fading away of Trump, okay, but you still have Trumpisms within the American politics. Number two, many allies and partners are skeptical and unsure about this Americans' grand strategies in the future. Another point, I think the lack of commitment, okay, will still lingering on, okay, with or without Trump. Lastly, if the U.S. continue the geopolitical rivalry as the main grand strategy, I think it will create a kind of problematic for the roles of the U.S. in the world as well. I think it's also applicable to Ambassador Kasit's question as well, which I think whether the P5 we have the potential and possible to rekindle the collective responsibility in the world. I think it will be challenging if the rule of the game is moving in the direction of the geopolitical rivalry and competition. It will be much more difficult, okay, because the perception toward each other will be more kind of antagonistic rather than friendly partnership or cooperation. So I think it's a answering from the big picture. I think it will be a little bit more difficult. So my hope lies on those middle powers and smaller states, okay, whether they will thrive in this situation, okay. That might include, capabilities and potential, identity, diplomacy, and a search for narrative, okay. I think this is another point that I'd like to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dekap. You can pick on any question you like, but perhaps the one about Japan, how Japan got eclipsed and overtaken by China in Southeast Asia, especially mainland Southeast Asia.
Okay, certainly. I think first I need to mention a bit that Japan has been active in the region since 1960s, not 80s. But the 80s is more accelerated role because of the foreign direct investment from Japan. I think why China came to supplant Japan influence in the regions, it's not that totally clear that China came to be influential in economic realm. In fact, if you take a look at investment in the region, Japan still top in some countries. Not always China. China took quite some time to catch up with Japanese investment in a country like Thailand, for example. So to answer why China came to be very influential in the region, I think there are two reasons. First, economic power. China with the trade, most countries in Southeast Asia number one trade partner is China, except Laos, the first trade partner with Thailand, for example. And Chinese tourists, investment, and also aid to countries like Laos and Cambodia, and also loans in terms of infrastructure building in these countries, BRI, and so on. So economic power is the reason, because China came to surpass Japan as the world's second largest economy in 2010. Japan somehow lost some confidence somehow, but we cannot write off Japan. Japan remains influential in the region economically and also increasingly in security, like I mentioned earlier in these sessions. Second lesson is political alignment or political power. Because in Southeast Asia, I think many countries, they are very comfortable with China in terms of autocratic fashions of decision making. For example, when China proposed free trade agreement with ASEAN in 2001, China moved very swiftly on that. Japan catch up following China, but Japan as a democratic country, they need to clear, to make understanding, to compensate, to talk, discuss with domestic interest groups. But China can move very fast. And also many countries in Southeast Asia are not democratic. So they are more comfortable with China. And when Thailand has a coup, whenever we have a coup, we tend to tilt toward China. So that can be the reason why China influence is quite big in Southeast Asia.
Thank you. Chan Chanindra, any question like to speak on? But maybe this question about could things be okay? Like the world is going in the wrong direction, but could there be a course correction and that we can still be okay?
Again, another big question, and how much time do I have? But yeah, just to quickly touch on other questions before I get to that one. So, Itipad, you asked about, if there's a shift in American politics, the Democrat Party coming to power, will things change? Unfortunately, I think a lot of things are cannot be reversed. Definitely one thing that cannot be reversed is our perception of the US. And I think a lot of, like US allies and all that do see that they are unreliable now because of this shift in politics. So, let's say if the Democrat Party does come to power, what about the next term? What about the next election? So I think we need to live with this learn to live with this unreliability and uncertainty that's coming during this time that the US has unleashed. Are there any opportunities today? Well, hopefully yes. Again, Adansi, like you mentioned, some ways to rethink how we structure our economy. Also, this might be an opportunity for ASEAN to rethink. I think Tudgasid's question is quite relevant. What are the possibilities of the PEM5 coming together, working together? I think that's a question for ASEAN as well. Now that the world is in turmoil, should we be looking inward to more of our region rather than inward to domestically? And how can we fix ASEAN, retain that ASEAN centrality, or salvage that ASEAN centrality that we used to have?
Okay, thank you very much. A question from one of my students, Saran Gon. I had no idea he was going to ask this question about Australia, New Zealand, and New Zealand, Southeast Asia. What's your vision, Ambassador McKinnon?
Well, New Zealand foreign policy has always been multi-directional, so we've tried to connect with everybody all the time. But certainly the relationship with Australia has been always at the forefront, and it's been very close and continues to be close. Probably close from our point of view than from Australia's point of view, but that's another matter. But together we have actually worked with Southeast Asia, with ASEAN, to formulate a free trade agreement with ASEAN, which is obviously very significant. And my assumption would be, and I'm speaking here not from direct knowledge, but more from what I would perceive, is that the relationships between our two countries in this part of the world will probably increase in density and content over the next few decades. And can I just say very briefly on two other points? One is that remember that in 2016 it was the Democrats who also said they wanted to pull out of the TPP. So it wasn't just the Republicans, the Democrats also were not that persuaded of the virtues of free trade. And second, in relation to that very intelligent question about the powers of the Security Council and the P5, I have to say, having been in the Security Council for 2 years in the 1990s, my answer is I think the chances of that happening are zero. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a new term reference going around, world order minus one or world minus one. We can also even say like world minus two, if we can make that happen. But I think that somehow if we can have a rules-based international system, despite what the US and China are doing against each other and to the world, to the rest of the world, then that's really the way ahead. I want to thank the students in particular, also the Thammasat students for coming by. The question about, the Trump, whether how long is Trump legacy, you see every day in the news, the big battle in the US about how Trump is using this executive power, the federal government, to try to impose his will. So we don't know how that will turn out in the US, but it's a big fight. They have it every day. Thank you very much for joining from Thammasat in uniform, but all the students, and please join me in thanking all our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.